Hi everyone, this is Selvi. Today's interview question is: what are the major differences between product backlog and sprint backlog? Sometimes there are situations that people confuse product backlog and sprint backlog. So let's try to understand some of the key points that differentiates product backlog and sprint backlog. First of all, product backlog is a master backlog. What is meant by master backlog? Which means it contains all the work items that are related to that specific product or project that we are working. And all these requirements will directly come from the customers or the stakeholders, and there is no such entry criteria. Only these items can go, only these many items can go. There is no such criteria. Even you can push a defect inside the product backlog. Even you can push a nice to have functionality in the product backlog. You can also add an epic in the product backlog. You can add a feature in the product backlog. You can add an user story in the product backlog. So there is no such entry criteria for entering the work items in the product backlog. And why it is called as the master backlog? Because this holds all the items of the project, right? So for the entire life cycle of the project, this backlog is going to be valid. So here itself we have seen 2-3 points. One is product backlog is called as the master backlog. Product backlog contains all the work items related to the project or the product that we are working, and this backlog is going to be valid till the end of the project life cycle. And this backlog can have all the work items and there is no entry criteria. Whatever the requirements that are coming in any work item type, as I mentioned, defect or requirement or feature or epic or user story or nice to have, whatever may be the type that is coming in, there is no entry criteria. All the items can be pushed into the product backlog. And product backlog is also called as the backlog. Sometimes people pull the items from the backlog. We should not get confused whether it is a sprint backlog or product backlog, because backlog means it is always product backlog, right? So now we got a little bit of clarity about the work items and the product backlog. Now let's try to understand what is the difference in this particular topic, what we discussed in the sprint backlog. Sprint backlog is a backlog that is valid only for a particular sprint. For example, the sprint backlog that is related to sprint 1 or sprint ABC, whatever may be the name of the sprint, for that particular sprint alone, the sprint backlog is valid. We already talked about what is the exit criteria of the sprint. There is no such exit criteria because sprint is a time-boxed event. So what is the conclusion here? The sprint backlog is the subset of master backlog, that is the product backlog. Okay, so it will not have all the items, it will have only the items that can be executed during this time-boxed event of sprint. So this sprint backlog is valid only during the time of sprint. After the sprint period, that means on the last day of the sprint, whatever may be the situation, even if it is completed or not completed, it doesn't matter. The sprint backlog is done, which means it is no more valid. Now, what will happen when the sprint backlog items are not completed, which means a team is unable to complete all the items, unfortunately, during the end of the sprint, and there are 2 user stories which are pending in the sprint backlog. They will go back to the master backlog. So the sprint backlog gets created from the product backlog, and whenever there are items that are completed or not completed, it will go back to the product backlog with the relevant status. If it is completed, not an issue, we have completed. But if it is not completed, product owner will take a decision whether it should sit on the product backlog or it should come to the next sprint backlog, because that call product owner will take based on the priority. So in a nutshell, sprint backlog is the backlog which is a subset of the product backlog that gets created and gets executed during the sprint cycle. this sprint backlog is valid only during the sprint time. At the end of the sprint, even though we completed the sprint backlog or not, it doesn't matter. Sprint will be done and this backlog is invalid, which means all the work items will go to the product backlog, but which are incompleted, product owner will take a call whether it should stay on the product backlog or it should be taken in the upcoming sprint, which is going to start the immediate next day. Now, next section, let's try to understand. In product backlog, all the items will not be in a refined state. All the items are not in the prioritized state. All these things will be gradually happening. Refinement will be happening on the product backlog work items. Prioritization will be happening on the product backlog work items. Why refinement is required? Why prioritization is required? Because refinement is required, then only we will get the complete clarity. We understand the dependencies, risk involved, so that we can resolve them well in advance. And at the end, when we are completely clear about the work item, we can also estimate it. What is the use of estimation? Estimation gives the clarity of how much time it is going to take, what are the identified complexities in that work, risk in that work, dependencies in that work. Based on that, we will be estimating, not only on the effort that we have already seen in the estimation topic. So, we talked about refinement. So, refinement's goal is we will be picking up the work items which are not refined in the product backlog. We will be refining it and make it very clear, understand all the associated dependencies, risk, complexities, everything. And at the end, we will be coming up with a story point, which is the estimation value. What is the use of priority? I have so many items in my product backlog, but on what basis now I need to execute it? I should know the order. How the order will be getting into picture? With the help of priority. So who will be setting the priority? Product owner, because product owner is our internal stakeholder. He or she knows the order of execution, what should be taken care when, what is the priority of each work item, why the priority is important. All those things product owner has complete clarity. So now refinement is done, priority is done. Of course, one more tip is, please refine the work items based on the priority. If you are keep on refining something which are not in priority, we will not be able to pick it as part of the sprint backlog, right? So now we talked about product backlog. In a nutshell, again, in this topic, what we have seen, product backlog work items are getting refined, estimated, and prioritized. All the work items are not prioritized, not refined, and estimated. The reason being because it is a continuous process. That's why we have a particular Scrum even called as backlog refinement session, where we will be understanding, refining the work items, try to understand the associated risk dependencies, and then come up with the clarity of the topic. And then once the clarity is achieved, then we will estimate it. And in addition to that, product owner also gives the priority. So all these things will be happening in the product backlog. Now, when sprint backlog comes into picture, so now we have a Scrum event called sprint planning. In the sprint planning, product owner and the team, development team, they all align together and come up with a sprint goal. The sprint goal should be very, very important, because based on the sprint goal only we will be picking up the sprint backlog work items, right? So now the sprint goal is the one the team is committing. To achieve that sprint goal, we will pull the items that are in the product backlog and put it in the sprint backlog. As I mentioned in the last topic itself, product backlog doesn't have any entry criteria. Any work items can come. It can come from your architect, it can come from your product management team, it can come from your program management team, it can come from your development team. Anyone actually can add the items. And only thing is, product owner is the responsible person for the product backlog. So it is always good to go through the channel of product owner to push the work items in. product backlog, but there is no such entry criteria. Only these people are allowed to share their ideas. Only these many ideas can be, there is no such concept, right? But in sprint backlog, it is not like that. Anything cannot enter the sprint backlog. The first thing is the work items that are aligned to the sprint goal. To achieve that sprint goal, what are the items that are required? Those items only we will be picking. And another thing is like, based on the priority, product owner will be guiding the items. And the next thing is, it should meet definition of ready checklist. Even though if it is of high priority, it doesn't matter, because definition of ready is not met. The definition of ready is a checklist which is going to help as a team what are the items that can come to our sprint backlog from the product backlog. Now, this sprint backlog has an entry criteria. Anything cannot enter, like how we talked about product backlog. Product backlog, any suggestions about the product, any suggestions about the project, anyone, any number, they can keep on entering into the product backlog. But sprint backlog, there is an entry criteria. It should align to the sprint goal what we have committed, and it should also with high priority what product owner is suggesting. In addition, it should meet the DOR checklist. Now we understood this concept. Product backlog is owned by product owner. I mentioned it in the last topic. Yes, always it is very, very important. Do not encourage everyone to add the work items in the product backlog, because then it will become a very huge list. One is huge list. Okay, that is still okay. But the problem is it will be out of control if so many people are putting the work items. Then product owner should first have the understanding what are the new items that came in, whom I need to approach to get the details. Instead, it is always a good practice. Go through the product owner and share your views, share your points, that this is what I'm expecting, this is the defect I have observed, or this is the nice to have functionality that we can have. This is the technical depth that I see as a challenge in our architecture. Please share the items through your product owner, or at least if you are adding, inform your product owner. That is a very good practice. Then product owner will have, okay, these many items are because product owner is the responsible person for your product backlog. It is very, very important for the product owner to prioritize the work items, to clean up the backlog. It should not be like so huge list of items where no one can understand what are the items, some of them are, whether those items are still valid or not. Sometimes what happens, we talk about a particular topic and we create so many user stories out of that, but over a period of time that functionality itself would have been nullified and it is no more valid. In that case, these user stories also, it is not required. At least there should be somewhere, either reuse that user story for some other purpose, or you should make a tag or you should make a status so that people will not get confused that this is a valid story. So for all these things, product owner is the responsible person to take care of this product backlog. So it is very important as a team that we need to support product owner to maintain this product backlog. Then who owns the sprint backlog? Sprint backlog is owned by the team, the development team. They own the sprint backlog because the entire sprint execution, they are the people who have committed on the sprint goal, and to achieve that sprint goal, they are using these work items which are in the sprint backlog, execute it, implement it, and deliver the sprint goal at the end of the sprint. So, development team owns the sprint backlog. Now, there are so many high-level items that we have seen as part of the product backlog and sprint backlog. So in a nutshell, I just want to quickly give some pointers so that you all can remember. I explained in detail, I think, about the product backlog and sprint backlog. The first point is entry criteria for work items in the product backlog, entry criteria of work items in the sprint backlog. Next one is master backlog, and sprint backlog is the subset of master backlog, that is the product backlog. So product backlog is also called as the backlog, which is the master backlog. Sprint backlog is the subset of the master backlog. Who owns the product backlog? Product owner. Who owns the sprint backlog? That is the development team. And whether the work items are prioritized, estimated, refined in the product backlog may or may not be. All the items may not be refined. It is not a compulsory thing because it gradually improves with the help of the backlog refinement session. Whereas in sprint backlog, all the refined, estimated, clarified, and DO or met work items only will be there. And what is the validity period? Master backlog or the product backlog, the validity is till the project life cycle is going on, the backlog also exists. Whereas sprint backlog is only valid for the sprint time. I think I have covered all the points. This is a very, very interesting topic. We would have covered so many things. I am very sure that this would have been helpful for many of us in revising many of the topics what we have already covered. Thank you so much everyone for listening. Happy learning and stay tuned.